Mariela Vexley never imagined that a simple family gathering would destroy everything she thought she knew about her marriage and her own sister, Selene. What started as a cheerful reunion ended in gasps, shattered glass, and a confession that would rip their family apart. But beneath the surface of smiles and wine toasts, Mariela had been quietly collecting clues, watching the two people she trusted most turn her world into a carefully crafted lie. By the time the truth came out, it wasn't just an affair, it was betrayal on a level no one saw coming. Mariela Cross had always believed her life was close to perfect. At 32, she had a successful online fashion boutique, a husband who turned heads at every event, and a home so beautiful it was once featured in a local lifestyle magazine. Maple Hollow, the small town they lived in, wasn't particularly exciting, but it was quiet and peaceful, the kind of place people went to feel safe. Mariela thrived on that quiet, thinking it reflected the calm of her marriage. She had married Colton Ridge 7 years ago after a whirlwind romance that began at a business seminar. He was confident, magnetic, and had a charm that made everyone lean in when he spoke. They were a power couple in a town that rarely had any. Colton worked in real estate, flipping houses and managing rentals around the region. He was always networking, always moving, and though he traveled often, he never failed to check in with a sweet message or a bouquet of flowers delivered to her office. Mariela, touched by the gestures, trusted him completely. She believed their marriage had the kind of foundation others envied: mutual support, laughter, shared dreams. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to point to them as a model couple. Mariela's younger sister, Selene Cross, was a different kind of person. Spirited, bold, and unapologetically confident, she had never been one to live a quiet life. She taught fitness classes during the day and bartended part-time at night. While their personalities were opposite, their bond had always been strong. They were close, the kind of sisters who shared clothes, secrets, and late-night phone calls. Mariela adored Selena and often invited her over. It wasn't unusual for Selena to spend weekends at their place, sometimes just crashing in the guest room after a long night out. Mariela loved the way Colton and Selene got along. It made her feel like she had the best of both worlds. Her husband and her sister, getting along like family should. But perfect things have a way of hiding flaws in the fine print. It started subtly. Mariela began noticing little things that didn't sit right with her. Colton had always been transparent with his schedule, but lately he'd become vague about where he was going. Client meeting, he would say, but offer no further detail. He started guarding his phone more closely, setting it face down, turning off notifications, even taking it with him into the bathroom. Mariela brushed it off. Maybe it was stress. The real estate market had been unpredictable lately, and he had seemed more tense than usual. Then there were the strange calls, short conversations that ended as soon as Mariela entered the room. Colton would smile too quickly, his voice overly casual. The more it happened, the more Mariela felt a dull ache of suspicion building in her chest. But she couldn't bring herself to believe anything was wrong. After all, this was Colton, her Colton, the man who once drove 4 hours just to surprise her with her favorite strawberry cheesecake after a bad day. One afternoon, Mariela found a long strand of blonde hair clinging to the collar of Colton's black wool coat. It was unmistakably not hers. Mariela's own hair was short and jet black. At first, she considered that it could have come from a client or someone at an open house. She wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that. But something about it kept gnawing at her. The next weekend, Selene came over for one of her usual visits. She was radiant and talkative, laughing more than usual and staying unusually close to Colton. They watched a movie together that night, the three of them seated on the couch. Selene sat between them. Mariela noticed how Selene leaned into Colton during the funny scenes, how he didn't pull away when her hand brushed his leg. It sent a ripple of unease through her, though she said nothing. That night, as they got into bed, Mariela asked Colton, casually, what he thought of Selene's new hairstyle. He seemed caught off guard for a second, but then answered, "What hairstyle?" That was the moment something inside her shifted. Selene had changed her hair color the week before, gone from brunette to golden blonde. In the days that followed, Mariela's mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. She couldn't understand how it had gotten to this point, how her sister and her husband could even be in the same sentence when it came to betrayal. But something deep down, something primal, told her she wasn't imagining things. She began paying closer attention, replaying past events in her head, picking apart interactions between Colton and Selene that once seemed harmless. How often had Selene called when Colton was home alone? How many times had Colton invited Selene to stay, over without consulting Mariela first? Mariela decided to test her instincts. She mentioned to Selene over a casual call that she was thinking of taking a short solo trip to visit a friend in another state. The next weekend, she pretended to leave, bags packed, car pulled out of the driveway, a goodbye message left for both of them. But she didn't go far. She booked a hotel room 10 minutes away and returned to the house late at night, using her key to sneak in through the back. What she found would haunt her. There were 2 glasses of wine on the kitchen counter and a soft trail of clothing leading to the guest room. She didn't go any further. She didn't need to. The truth had stepped out of the shadows. Her perfect life had cracked wide open, and for the first time in her marriage, Mariela no longer recognized the people closest to her. The betrayal wasn't just a wound. It was an explosion, and she was just starting to gather the pieces. Mariela didn't sleep that night. She returned to the hotel in a haze, her hands trembling as she locked the door behind her. The image of the wine glasses, the trail of clothes, and the soft flicker of candlelight coming from the guest room played on a loop in her mind. It wasn't just the betrayal that broke her. It was who had done it. Her sister. Her own blood. The person she had defended in countless arguments, supported through every heartbreak, and trusted enough to let into her home without a second thought. She stared at the ceiling until morning, the weight of realization pressing heavily on her chest. The sun rose, but it didn't bring clarity, only a growing sense of devastation. She knew she couldn't confront them yet, not without proof. If she wanted answers, if she wanted justice, she needed to be smarter than both of them. Emotion had to take a back seat. She had to play their game. The first thing she did was return home as if nothing had happened. She waited until the afternoon, walked in through the front door with a bag of groceries, and called out Colton's name like any other day. He greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. There was no guilt in his eyes, no hesitation in his smile. Selene had already left that morning, her side of the guest room spotless and undisturbed, like she hadn't been there at all. Mariela felt like she was in a movie, watching a carefully staged performance, and she played along. Over the next week, Mariela became an observer in her own life. She noticed the way Colton's phone lit up at night, always with messages he never read in front of her. She saw how Selene's visits had grown more frequent again, under the guise of needing a break from work, or just wanting sister time. Mariela made mental notes of every hug that lingered too long, every look they thought went unnoticed. She learned to smile when she wanted to scream. She bought a small recording device and hid it in the guest room lamp. Another one went under the living room couch. Then she installed a discreet app on Colton's phone, one that backed up his messages to her cloud account. It wasn't easy. She had to wait for the right moment, while he showered, while he stepped out to take a call. Every step made her stomach twist with guilt, but she reminded herself this wasn't betrayal. It was survival. Days passed before the first message came through. It was a short text from Selene. "Miss you already? Last night was perfect." Mariela read it with shaking hands, her eyes scanning every word as if they could explain the pain they caused. More texts followed. Some were brief, others graphic. They spoke of stolen moments, secret plans, and whispered lies. Colton responded, with just as much warmth. There was no doubt now, no chance of misinterpretation. But one message stopped her cold. Selene had written, She's getting suspicious. We need to be careful. That single sentence sent a chill through Mariela's entire body. They knew, or at least Selene suspected. The walls were closing in faster than she expected. If she didn't act soon, they might disappear altogether, or worse, try something desperate. She needed to expose them before they could twist the truth, before they could manipulate the narrative. Mariela considered many options: a private confrontation, a public one, telling her parents, telling Colton's boss. But none of it felt powerful enough. She wanted a moment that would cut as deeply as she had been cut, a moment that no one would forget. And then an idea came to her, one that would change everything. Every year, her extended family gathered for the cross-family reunion. It was tradition. A big event hosted at a rented countryside estate, complete with catered meals, games, speeches, and photo slideshows. Everyone would be there: her parents, cousins, aunts, uncles. And this year, Colton and Selene were both expected to attend. Mariela decided that would be the stage. She began planning in silence, preparing the files, downloading backups of the conversations, editing together a clean timeline. She arranged with the event manager to include her personal presentation after dinner, saying it was a tribute to her marriage. No one questioned it. She was, after all, known for being the thoughtful, creative one. In the days leading up to the reunion, Mariela stayed calm. She smiled at Colton, cooked his favorite meals, and even told Selene she couldn't wait to see her that weekend. Her voice never wavered, her expression never cracked, but inside, she was a storm waiting to be unleashed. The night before the reunion, Mariela barely slept, not because of fear, but anticipation. Her moment was coming. The truth was finally going to tear through their web of lies. She packed everything she needed: her files, her recordings, and her resolve. Then she slipped her wedding ring off her finger and left it on the bathroom counter. She was no longer the wife who trusted blindly. She was the woman who was about to expose everything. The cross-family reunion began with laughter, handshakes, and the hum of familiar voices echoing through the countryside estate. Children darted across the lawn, grandparents exchanged warm hugs, and long-lost cousins raised glasses in celebration. The scent of grilled food mixed with the crisp scent of spring air, and everything seemed as perfect as it always did, on the surface. Mariela arrived early, dressed in a soft blue dress that complemented her calm demeanor. She greeted everyone with grace, her smile effortless, her eyes steady. She moved from table to table, engaging in conversation, checking in on old relatives, making sure everything appeared normal. Colton arrived shortly after, looking polished and unsuspecting. He kissed her on the cheek, like always, and joined her as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Selene showed up last, fashionably late as usual, wearing a figure-hugging red dress that drew eyes and comments. She hugged their parents, chatted with the cousins, and even gave Mariela a lingering embrace that nearly made her sick. To everyone else, it looked like the sisters were as close as ever. But Mariela's heart beat like a drum beneath her calm shell. She watched them closely, observed every silent exchange between her husband and her sister, the shared glances, the soft smirks, the barely there touches when they passed too closely. As the day went on, Mariela kept to her schedule. Lunch came and went, followed by yard games and music. People laughed, posed for pictures, and shared stories. The illusion of happiness floated above them all like a well-rehearsed play. But Mariela wasn't interested in the performance. She was only waiting for the finale. The main dinner was served at sunset, under glowing string lights and paper lanterns that bobbed gently in the breeze. Long tables were set with floral centerpieces, and everyone gathered to eat, talk, and toast. Speeches followed, sweet, light-hearted words from uncles, cousins, and old friends. There were jokes, inside stories, and applause. The atmosphere brimmed with warmth. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and the event coordinator tapped her glass. "Now," she said brightly, Mariela has something special prepared, a tribute to her love story with Colton. Mariela stood, heart steady, lips curved in a serene smile. She walked to the front, plugged in her USB drive, and faced the crowd. Her voice was calm as she thanked everyone for being there, talked briefly about the meaning of love and family, and how much this reunion meant to her. No one suspected what was about to happen. Not even Colton, who watched from the table with a proud smile, nor Selene, who raised her wineglass with a lazy grin. The screen flickered to life behind Mariela. At first, it showed wedding photos, she and Colton dancing, cutting the cake, holding hands on their honeymoon. A soft melody played in the background. Then the tone changed. A screenshot appeared, a text from Colton to Selene. "Can't wait to hold you again. That night in the guest room was everything." The room went quiet. People shifted in their seats. Colton sat upright, confusion flickering across his face. Selene's wineglass froze in her hand. Another message appeared. Selene's reply. "She's clueless. I almost feel bad." Almost. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs started. Someone dropped their fork. Mariela stood still, watching their faces, watching the color drain from Colton's cheeks and Selene's smirk falter into panic. Then came the photos. Screenshots of their text threads, times and dates lined up in painful clarity, messages about secret meetings, lies they told Mariela, and jokes about her being too naive to notice. Each one was more damning than the last. The final clip was a short audio recording. It captured Colton's voice whispering to Selene about how easy it had become to deceive Mariela, how he was only staying with her for appearances. When the screen went black, silence stretched across the entire estate. For a moment, no one moved. Then whispers erupted. Questions, disbelief, outrage. Some turned to stare at Colton. Others looked at Selene in horror. Their parents looked stunned, mouths agape, faces pale. The illusion had shattered completely. Colton stood up, stammering, trying to say something. But Mariela held up her hand gently and spoke over him. Her voice was soft, but it carried. She thanked the family again for attending. She apologized for the disruption, but said the truth was too important to bury. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away from the crowd. Selene rushed after her, but Mariela didn't stop. She walked straight to her car, ignoring the chaos behind her, the yelling, the arguments, the tears. Colton didn't follow. He stood surrounded by stunned relatives, unable to fix what had just exploded in his face. He had been exposed, not just as a cheating husband, but as someone capable of lying to everyone he claimed to love. Mariela drove away from the estate, her hands shaking, her chest tight. But beneath it all, there was a deep, quiet satisfaction. She had taken control of her story. She had refused to be the victim kept in the shadows. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Everything she had planned had gone exactly as intended. The mask was off, the truth was out, and the cracks in their carefully constructed world were now too wide to ever be sealed again. The fallout from the family gatherings spread like wildfire. In the days that followed, the Cross family's once proud name was reduced to whispered conversations, scandalous speculation, and fractured relationships. What had once been a close-knit family was now divided into silent factions, each person choosing sides between shock, betrayal, or denial. News of Mariela's explosive reveal traveled fast, not just within the family, but through their community, neighbors, and even among old friends who hadn't attended. It was as if someone had pulled the curtain off a long-running lie, and no one knew how to react. Mariela returned home that evening to a quiet house. Colton hadn't followed her, and for that, she was grateful. She locked the door behind her, changed into her most comfortable pajamas, and collapsed onto the couch. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages, some supportive, others confused, and some downright nosy. She ignored them all. Her mind felt heavy, but her heart, oddly enough, felt light. She had carried the truth for weeks, nurturing it, preparing it, wondering if she had the strength to let it out. And now that she had, it felt like she could finally breathe again. But exposing the truth wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The next morning, Colton returned to the house. He didn't knock. He used his key and stepped inside, like nothing had changed. But Mariela was ready. She had packed his belongings into large boxes and left them by the door. A neatly written note sat on top. "Do not speak to me unless it's through a lawyer." She never came out of her room to greet him. She heard him fumble around in confusion, mutter something under his breath, and finally drag the boxes out the door. When she heard his car pull away, she stared at the ceiling and allowed the first tear to fall. Not for him, but for the life she had believed she had. Selene, on the other hand, wasn't taking the humiliation quietly. She had spent the night at a hotel, away from the shame and the judging eyes. Unlike Colton, she didn't regret the affair itself, only the exposure. Her pride, her image, her entire persona had been built around being envied, but now, the sister she thought she could outshine had turned the tables in a public, unforgettable way. Selene began spinning her version of the story almost immediately. To those who would still listen, she claimed Mariela had twisted everything, taken private messages out of context, and created a spectacle just for revenge. But few believed her. The screenshots had been too clear, the evidence too undeniable. Mariela, meanwhile, began her quiet process of healing. She stayed away from the online chatter and didn't return anyone's calls for a while. Instead, she poured her energy into work, long walks, journaling, and restoring the parts of her identity that had been buried under years of deception. Her co-workers, who had always seen her as calm and composed, now admired her strength even more. They didn't ask for details. They simply gave her space, and she appreciated it more than words could express. The legal process moved fast. Mariela wasted no time filing for divorce. With the help of a sharp attorney, she compiled everything she had: digital records, messages, timelines, and built a case that left no room for defense. Colton tried to resist at first, sending long emails full of empty apologies and dramatic promises, but Mariela remained stone cold. She had nothing left to salvage. For her, the marriage had ended the day she saw the first message between him and Selene. The rest had only been about planning her exit on her own terms. Meanwhile, Selene faced consequences of her own. Their parents, especially their mother, were heartbroken. Not just by the betrayal, but by the deception Selene had maintained for so long. Family members who had once adored her now kept their distance. She was uninvited from baby showers, birthdays, and even a cousin's wedding. The damage she had done wasn't just to her sister, but to the whole family. Her name had become a stain they didn't want around during celebrations. And deep down, Selene began to feel the weight of isolation pressing in. Despite everything, Mariela never responded to her sister's attempts to reconnect. Selene sent messages, some angry, others remorseful, but Mariela remained silent. She had chosen peace over confrontation, healing over chaos. Her silence was her answer. No shouting, no final argument, just distance. And in that distance, Selene found herself more alone than she had ever been. In a surprising twist, Colton didn't end up with Selene. After the dust settled, he tried to rekindle something with her, claiming they could start fresh now that the truth was out. But Selene had already begun to resent him. He had let her take the fall just as much as he had. He hadn't defended her when the family turned on her, hadn't stopped the storm that Mariela unleashed. He had only thought about himself, and she saw now that she was just another convenience in his life. Their affair had been built on secrecy and lies, and without that thrill, it collapsed under the weight of its own toxicity. Mariela's journey wasn't easy, but it was honest. She took each day one step at a time, reclaiming her voice, her power, and her identity. She didn't need revenge. She had already exposed the truth in the most unforgettable way possible, and now she was choosing to live. There were still moments, when the pain crept in, flashes of old memories, random questions about what was real and what wasn't. But they no longer controlled her. They no longer owned her. She had walked through betrayal and come out the other side stronger, freer, and more awake than ever before. The cracks in her world had let in the light, and for the first time in years, she felt like herself again. In the weeks that followed the emotional storm, life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm for Mariela. The divorce was finalized with remarkable speed, thanks to the mountain of evidence she had presented. There were no custody battles, no shared properties to divide, only silence where promises had once been made. It was both painful and peaceful. She didn't just lose a husband, she lost the illusion of who she thought he was. But what she gained in return was clarity, and that was something she hadn't felt in years. Mariela moved out of the house she once shared with Colton and found a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't lavish or large, but it felt like hers. She picked out every piece of furniture herself, painted the walls the colors she liked, and created an environment that felt warm and authentic. There were no ghostly remnants of lies or betrayal in the corners, only hope for something better. The apartment became her sanctuary, a fresh canvas for a life she was rebuilding from the ground up. Her routine was simple. Mornings were filled with quiet coffee breaks and peaceful walks through the park nearby. Afternoons were spent working, where her focus had sharpened in the absence of emotional distractions. Colleagues noticed the difference, not just in her performance, but in her demeanor. There was a calm strength about her now, something deeper than confidence. She had been through the fire, and she was still standing. That resilience made people admire her more than ever. But healing wasn't a straight path. Occasionally, Mariela found herself revisiting memories she wished she could erase. Simple things. A song on the radio, the smell of a certain cologne, or the sight of couples holding hands sometimes triggered a brief flicker of sadness. Not because she missed Colton, but because she mourned the years she had unknowingly shared with someone who had been living a double life. It was grief, not for the man, but for the wasted time. Still, she allowed herself to feel those emotions, to sit with them without judgment, and then let them pass like clouds drifting across the sky. Meanwhile, Colton faded further into irrelevance. After the divorce, he moved in temporarily with a friend from work. Word spread that he had lost his job due to behavioral concerns and a lack of professionalism, something Mariela suspected had been brewing long before the affair. He reached out to her once, a short, desperate email begging for forgiveness and one more conversation. Mariela never replied. There was nothing left to say. The damage he caused wasn't something an apology could undo. Some things, once broken, remain broken. Selene too disappeared from Mariela's life. Their mother, still deeply hurt by the betrayal, tried to mediate at first, hoping that time would heal the wounds between her daughters. But Mariela stood firm. She had made peace with the fact that forgiveness didn't always require reconciliation. She could let go of the bitterness without ever letting Selena back into her world. Some betrayals, especially those that cut through bloodlines, are simply unforgivable. Selene's life continued to unravel. She lost her job after her employer discovered the online backlash linked to the scandal. Her social circle dwindled as former friends distanced themselves from the drama. She had built her identity on charm and surface-level beauty, but when that veneer cracked, there was little left beneath it. Alone and disgraced, she attempted to reach out to extended family members, but the reception was cold. Her fall from grace was swift and brutal, and unlike Mariela, she struggled to accept her role in her own downfall. Mariela's family, once broken by the incident, began slowly repairing itself, without Selene or Colton. Bonds that had been strained by disbelief and divided loyalties started to mend. Her cousins checked in more frequently, her uncles offered support, and her mother spent more time with her, making an effort to show love that once went unsaid. The betrayal had shaken them all, but it also forced them to reevaluate what truly mattered: loyalty, trust, respect. As the months passed, Mariela allowed herself to dream again. She enrolled in evening art classes, something she had always wanted to do but never pursued. She started journaling regularly, documenting her emotions, growth, and victories, no matter how small. She even traveled alone for the first time, just a weekend trip to the mountains, but it felt monumental. Standing at the edge of a scenic overlook, breathing in fresh air, she realized how much lighter she felt. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. The scandal that once defined her story became a chapter in her past, not the title of her future. People still whispered, of course, but the tone had shifted. Mariela was no longer the victim of a cheating husband and a disloyal sister. She was the woman who stood up, exposed the truth, and walked away with dignity. She didn't let pain harden her. She let it shape her into someone stronger. In time, love returned to her life, not through someone else, but through herself. She no longer needed validation from a partner to feel complete. She had learned to enjoy her own company, to trust her instincts, and to recognize red flags early. If she ever loved again, it would be on her terms. One quiet evening, she sat on her apartment balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and purple, and a breeze rustled through the trees. In that moment, she felt something unexpected: peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer pretending. The truth had been her weapon, her shield, and ultimately, her freedom. And though the scars would remain, they no longer hurt. They were simply proof that she had survived the unimaginable and come out whole.